Rowan had spent 6 years perfecting the art of being invisible. She kept her head down when the other servants passed. She spoke softly, moved quietly, and never, ever let her wolf rise to the surface. The beast inside her was too powerful, too dangerous, too recognizable. If anyone discovered what she truly was, the hunters would come. They always came. And this time, there would be no one left to protect her. So she scrubbed floors. She washed linens. She became the meek little Omega that everyone overlooked, just another face in the endless parade of servants who kept Thornhaven Castle running. The nobles barely noticed her. The guards looked right through her. Even the head housekeeper, a sharp-eyed woman named Bretta, dismissed her as simple and slow. It was perfect. It was safe. It was slowly killing her. Her wolf paced constantly, clawing at the walls of the cage Rowan had built inside her mind. It wanted to run, to hunt, to howl at the moon until the mountains shook. Every full moon was agony, hiding in the cellar, biting through leather straps to keep from screaming as her bones tried to shift, and she forced them to stay still. No one could know. No one could ever know. But secrets had a way of finding the light. The attack came without warning. One moment, Rowan was carrying a basket of herbs through the castle's eastern garden. The next, screams erupted from the main courtyard, followed by the clash of steel and the unmistakable snarls of wolves in battle. She dropped the basket and pressed herself against the garden wall, heart hammering as chaos exploded around her. Raiders, a dozen of them at least, already shifted into massive wolves with foam-flecked muzzles and murder in their eyes. The castle guards were fighting back, but they were outnumbered and caught off guard. Bodies littered the cobblestones. Blood splashed across the fountain where she had sat just yesterday, enjoying a rare moment of peace. She should run. She should hide. That was the plan, always the plan. Survive another day, keep her head down, stay invisible. Then she heard the child scream. A little girl, no more than 5 or 6, was trapped between an overturned cart and the garden wall. One of the raider wolves prowled toward her, lips peeled back from yellowed fangs, and the guards were too far away, too occupied with their own fights to reach her in time. Rowan didn't think. She just moved. Her wolf exploded out of her like a dam breaking. 6 years of suppression, 6 years of chains, all shattered in a single heartbeat. The shift took her mid-stride, bones cracking and reforming, skin rippling into silver-white fur that gleamed like moonlight. She was massive, far larger than any Omega had a right to be, and when she slammed into the raider wolf, he crumpled like paper beneath her jaws. She killed him in seconds. Then she turned on the next one, and the next, moving through the courtyard like a ghost made of fury and teeth. The raiders hadn't expected resistance like this. They certainly hadn't expected it from a servant. By the time she finished, 5 of them lay dead at her paws, and the rest were fleeing toward the gates. Silence fell over the courtyard. Rowan shifted back, her body trembling with the aftershocks of transformation. Her servant's dress was torn and blood-stained. Her silver hair tumbled loose around her shoulders, and every single person in the courtyard was staring at her with wide, horrified eyes. "What in the moon goddess's name?" a deep voice growled. "Was that?" She turned. Alpha King Darius Vane stood at the top of the castle steps, flanked by his personal guard. He was tall and broad, with dark hair cropped close to his skull and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes were the color of molten amber, and right now, they burned with an intensity that made her wolf whimper. He descended the steps slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. The crowd parted before him like water around stone. When he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, his nostrils flared. "That was not an Omega's wolf," he said quietly. "That was a Silverborn." Rowan's blood turned to ice. The Silverborn were legends, an ancient bloodline of wolves so powerful they could challenge alphas, so rare they had been hunted nearly to extinction generations ago. If anyone discovered she carried that blood, she would become a target, a weapon to be claimed or a threat to be eliminated. She had hidden for 6 years, and in one moment of weakness, one choice to save a child, she had destroyed everything. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And why have you been hiding in my castle?" Rowan's mind raced through her options. She could run. Her wolf was fast enough to clear the castle walls before anyone caught her. She could fight, though taking on the Alpha King and his entire guard would be suicide, even for a Silverborn. Or she could lie, spin some story about not knowing what she was, about the shift being a fluke. But the king's amber eyes pinned her in place, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that he would see through any deception. This was a man who had survived wars and betrayals and assassination attempts. He hadn't become Alpha King by being foolish. "My name is Rowan," she said quietly, "and I've been hiding because if I don't, people try to kill me." A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those molten eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or calculation. "Take her to my study," he ordered his guards, "and clear the courtyard. I want the wounded tended and the dead counted. We'll discuss how a dozen raiders breached our walls later." 2 guards stepped forward, flanking Rowan without touching her. She considered resisting, but what would be the point? She had nowhere to go. Her cover was blown, her careful anonymity shattered. If the king wanted her dead, fighting would only delay the inevitable. She let them escort her into the castle. The king's study was nothing like she expected. She had imagined cold stone and military precision, but instead she found warmth, a fire crackling in the hearth, shelves stuffed with books, a worn leather chair positioned by the window. Maps covered one wall, marked with pins and notes in a bold hand. It felt less like a throne room and more like a sanctuary. The guards left her there alone. Minutes passed. Rowan stood in the center of the room, her torn dress stiff with drying blood, and tried to quiet the trembling in her limbs. Her wolf was restless, pacing, unsettled by both the fight and the exposure. After 6 years in its cage, it didn't know how to feel about being seen. When the door finally opened, she forced herself to stand straight. King Darius entered alone, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He had removed his outer armor and wore only a dark tunic that stretched across his broad shoulders. Up close, he was even more imposing, taller than she had realized, with the kind of controlled power that came from years of training. The scar through his eyebrow made him look dangerous. The intelligence in his eyes made him look deadly. "Silverborn," he said, circling her slowly. "I thought your kind were extinct." "Nearly. Not quite." "How did you survive? Who trained you?" Rowan hesitated. The truth was complicated, painful, wrapped in memories she had buried deep. But she had no leverage here, no cards left to play. "My grandmother. She was the last of our line, or so she thought. When my wolf manifested, she taught me everything she knew. How to fight, how to hide, how to suppress my shift so completely that even other wolves couldn't sense what I was." "And your grandmother?" "Dead." The word came out flat. "Hunters found us 7 years ago. She held them off so I could escape. I've been running ever since." The king stopped his circling, standing directly in front of her now. This close, she could smell him, cedar and iron, and something wild that made her wolf's ears prick with interest. She pushed the sensation down viciously. The last thing she needed was her wolf getting ideas about the man who held her fate in his hands. "You've been in my castle for 6 years," he said slowly, "scrubbing my floors, washing my linens, and I never knew." "That was the point." His jaw tightened. "You made a fool of me. I survived. There's a difference." For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Rowan stared back, refusing to drop her gaze despite the alpha power pressing against her like a physical weight. She had spent too long pretending to be weak. If she was going to die tonight, she would die with her head held high. Then, unexpectedly, the king laughed. It was a short, rough sound, more surprised than amused. "You have spine, I'll give you that." He moved to the fireplace, bracing one hand against the mantel and staring into the flames. "The raiders who attacked today, they weren't random. They were looking for something. Or someone." Ice slid down Rowan's spine. "You think they were looking for me?" "I think it's quite a coincidence that the first attack on Thornhaven in 3 years happens to reveal a hidden Silverborn in my midst." He glanced back at her, his amber eyes sharp. "Someone knew you were here. Someone told them." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had been so careful, so invisible. How could anyone have found her? "I can't let you leave," the king continued. "If there are hunters tracking you, they'll follow, and I won't have them bringing war to my doorstep." "So what then? You'll lock me in the dungeon?" "I'll keep you close." He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "You saved that child's life today. You killed 5 raiders single-handedly. Whatever you are, whatever you're hiding, you're valuable. And I protect what's valuable. I'm not a weapon for you to use." "No," he agreed quietly. "But you might be an ally worth having, if you're willing." Rowan's wolf stirred, intrigued despite her better judgment. An ally, not a prisoner, not a tool. She didn't trust it, didn't trust him, but it was more than she had expected. "And if I refuse?" The king smiled, slow and dangerous. "Then I suppose we'll find out exactly how good you are at running." It wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. And despite everything, despite 6 years of survival instincts screaming at her to flee, Rowan felt something spark in her chest. "Fine," she said. "I'll stay, but I have conditions." The Alpha King raised an eyebrow. "You're in no position to make demands." "And yet." She met his gaze without flinching. "I'm making them anyway." For the first time, something other than suspicion flickered across his face, something that looked almost like respect. "Very well, Silverborn." He gestured to the chair by the fire. "Sit. Let's negotiate." The negotiations lasted until dawn. Rowan demanded privacy, a room of her own with a lock on the inside. She demanded freedom of movement within the castle grounds. She demanded that her true nature remain secret from everyone except those who had witnessed her shift. The king countered with requirements of his own. She would train with his warriors, help fortify the castle's defenses, and submit to questioning about the hunters who had killed her grandmother. By the time they finished, Rowan was exhausted and oddly exhilarated. No one had ever treated her as an equal before, not since her grandmother died. The king argued with her, pushed back on her demands, and ultimately compromised with a practicality that surprised her. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't kind either. He was simply efficient, treating her like a problem to be solved rather than a threat to be eliminated. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. The room they gave her was in the East Tower, far from the servants' quarters where she had spent the last 6 years. It was small but clean, with a proper bed and a window that overlooked the mountains. After so many years sleeping in cramped dormitories surrounded by other servants, the solitude felt like a luxury. Her first night, she didn't sleep at all. She sat by the window and watched the moon rise, her wolf finally still for the first time in years. It was strange, not having to fight the shift, strange and terrifying and a little bit wonderful. The training began the next morning. King Darius led the session himself, much to Rowan's surprise. She had expected him to hand her off to some captain or weapons master, but instead he met her in the private training yard behind the castle, dressed in simple sparring clothes with a wooden practice sword in his hand. "Show me what you can do," he said. She showed him. 6 years of suppression hadn't dulled her skills. Her grandmother had drilled fighting forms into her bones, and her body remembered even when her mind wanted to forget. She moved through the exercises with deadly precision: strike, parry, dodge, counter. When the king attacked, she met him blow for blow, their wooden swords cracking together with enough force to send vibrations up her arms. He was good, better than good. He fought with the brutal efficiency of someone who had killed more times than he could count. But Rowan was faster, and her reflexes had been honed by a lifetime of running. When she finally slipped past his guard and pressed her sword tip to his throat, they were both breathing hard. "Impressive," he admitted, stepping back. A thin line of sweat traced down his temple. "Your grandmother taught you well." "She taught me to survive." Something shifted in his expression. "There's a difference between surviving and living, Rowan." Hearing her name in his voice did something strange to her chest. She ignored it. "Surviving is all I've had for 7 years. Living is a luxury I can't afford." He was quiet for a moment, studying her with those amber eyes that seemed to see too much. Then he set down his practice sword and moved to a bench at the edge of the yard, gesturing for her to join him. "I know something about surviving," he said when she sat. "My father was killed when I was 16, assassinated by rivals who thought a boy king would be easy to overthrow. I spent the first 5 years of my reign fighting wars on 3 fronts, putting down rebellions, executing traitors." His jaw tightened. "I learned to trust no one, to see threats in every shadow. It kept me alive, but it made me hard, cold, the kind of king people fear rather than love." Rowan didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected him to share anything real, anything vulnerable. The Alpha King was supposed to be untouchable, unknowable. But the man sitting beside her looked tired, and for a moment, almost human. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because I recognize that look in your eyes." He turned to face her, and the morning light caught the scar through his eyebrow, the faint lines of exhaustion around his mouth. "You've been alone so long you've forgotten there's any other way to be. You've built walls so high you can't remember what it feels like to let someone in." His voice dropped. "I'm not saying I'm the answer, but I'm saying I understand." Her wolf stirred, pressing against the walls she had built, yearning toward him in a way that made her nervous. This was dangerous. He was dangerous. Not because he might hurt her, but because he might make her want things she couldn't have. "I don't need you to understand me," she said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. "Maybe not." He rose, brushing dust from his trousers. "But you have it anyway." He walked away, leaving her alone in the training yard with the sun warming her face and her heart beating too fast in her chest. She was in trouble. Deep, terrible, wonderful trouble. The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm of training, strategizing, and carefully maintained distance. Every morning, Rowan met Darius in the training yard. They sparred until their muscles burned and their lungs ached, pushing each other harder than either would have pushed alone. Every afternoon, she joined his war council, offering insights about the hunters, their tactics, their tracking methods, the signs that meant they were closing in. The king's advisors looked at her with suspicion at first, but her knowledge was too valuable to dismiss. And every evening, when the castle quieted and the moon rose over the mountains, she found herself drawn to the king's private study. It started by accident. She had been wandering the corridors, too restless to sleep, when she saw the light beneath his door. She had knocked without thinking, and he had opened it without question, simply stepping aside to let her in. They had talked until nearly dawn, about strategy, about the hunters, about nothing at all. When she finally left, her chest had felt lighter than it had in years. After that, it became a habit. "Tell me about your grandmother," Darius said one night, passing her a cup of warmed wine. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the bookshelves. "What was she like?" Rowan turned the cup in her hands, letting the heat seep into her palms. She rarely spoke about her grandmother. The memories were too precious, too painful. But something about the quiet intimacy of this room, this hour, made the words easier. She was fierce, Rowan said softly, the kind of woman who could silence a room just by walking into it. When I was young, I thought she was invincible. She had survived the purges that killed most of our bloodline, had hidden for decades while the hunters searched for any remaining Silverborn. She taught me that our power was both a gift and a curse, something to be treasured but never displayed. She sounds remarkable. She was. Rowan's throat tightened. She was also lonely. Hiding takes a toll. By the time I was old enough to understand, she had been alone for so long that she didn't know how to be anything else. I think that's why she poured everything into training me. I was her purpose, her reason to keep surviving. Darius was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. The night my father died, I was in this room, studying. I heard the commotion, but by the time I reached him, it was too late. He bled out in my arms while his guards stood there, useless. He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. I've never told anyone that, not even my closest advisors. Rowan set down her cup and moved to sit beside him on the worn leather couch, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Why are you telling me? Because you understand what it means to carry something heavy alone. He turned his head, and his amber eyes met hers with an intensity that stole her breath. And because I'm tired of carrying it. The air between them felt charged, electric. Rowan's wolf pressed against her skin, desperate to close the remaining distance, to touch him, to claim him. She held herself still through sheer force of will. I'm not good at this, she admitted. Letting people in, trusting. Every instinct I have tells me to run before you can hurt me. I know. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of silver hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered at her jaw, warm and impossibly gentle. I'm not good at it either, but I find myself wanting to try. With you. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment she should retreat, should rebuild the walls that had kept her safe for so long. But his hand was still on her face, and his eyes held something raw and hopeful, and for the first time in 7 years, Rowan didn't want to run. If I stay, she whispered, if I let this happen, I need you to understand what you're risking. The hunters won't stop. They'll come for me eventually, and anyone close to me becomes a target. I've been a target my entire life. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, light as a feather. At least this time, I'd be fighting for something I chose. Someone I chose. Her wolf howled with joy. The sound echoed through her chest, so loud she was certain he must hear it. Darius. His name felt sacred on her lips, a gift she had never thought to give. Rowan. He said it like a vow. Neither of them moved to close the distance. Not yet. The moment hung suspended between them, fragile and precious, a promise of what could be if they were brave enough to reach for it. When she finally returned to her room that night, Rowan pressed a hand to her racing heart and smiled. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was starting to live. The full moon came 3 weeks after the attack. Rowan had been dreading it. For 6 years, the full moon meant agony, fighting her wolf's desperate need to shift, biting through leather to keep from screaming, hiding in cellars and dark corners until the madness passed. But this time, she didn't have to hide. This time, Darius led her through a hidden passage behind the castle to a secluded valley surrounded by ancient pines. I thought you might want somewhere private, he said, his amber eyes soft in the moonlight. Somewhere you can run without being seen. Her throat tightened. He had done this for her. Found this place, planned this escape, all so she could experience a full moon without fear for the first time in 7 years. Come with me, she said before she could think better of it. His eyebrows rose. You want me to see you shift? I want you to run with me. Something fierce flickered across his face. Without another word, he pulled his tunic over his head, revealing a chest scarred from battles and broad with muscle. Rowan's mouth went dry. She had seen him shirtless in training, but this felt different, more intimate. The moonlight painted his skin silver, and her wolf howled with wanting. She turned away to undress, her fingers trembling on her laces. The night air was cold against her bare skin, but she barely felt it. The moon was calling, and her wolf was already surging forward, eager and joyful, and finally, blessedly free. The shift took her like a wave. It didn't hurt. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt at all. Her bones reshaped themselves like water flowing into a new vessel, and then she was standing on four paws, her silver-white fur gleaming, her senses exploding with the scents and sounds of the forest. Beside her, a massive black wolf shook out his dark fur. Darius. His eyes were still amber, still sharp with intelligence, and when he looked at her, she felt the recognition like a spark jumping between them. They ran. Through the pines, across frozen streams, up rocky slopes that would have been treacherous on two legs. Rowan had forgotten what it felt like to run without fear, to let her wolf stretch its legs and glory in its own power. The black wolf kept pace beside her, never falling behind, never trying to lead. They moved as equals, shadows racing beneath the stars. When they finally stopped, panting and exhilarated, they had reached a cliff overlooking the entire valley. The moon hung heavy and full above them, so close Rowan felt she could touch it. She shifted back first, her human form returning with a shiver. A moment later, Darius stood beside her, both of them naked and breathless, steam rising from their heated skin into the cold air. That was, she started, then stopped. She didn't have words for what that was. I know. His voice was rough. He stepped closer, and her heart rate spiked. Rowan. Yes? I'm going to kiss you now, unless you tell me not to. She didn't tell him not to. His mouth found hers, and the world fell away. He kissed her like he had been starving for it, like she was the first breath after drowning. His hands gripped her waist, pulling her against him, and she gasped at the heat of his skin, the solid strength of his body. Her fingers dug into his shoulders as she kissed him back with equal desperation. When they finally broke apart, they were both shaking. I should have done that weeks ago, he said, pressing his forehead to hers. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid. His breath was warm against her lips. Afraid that if I touched you, I'd never be able to stop. Afraid that what I feel for you is too much, too fast, too dangerous. What do you feel? He pulled back to look at her, and his amber eyes blazed with something that made her heart stutter. Everything, he said simply. I feel everything. When you walk into a room, I can't look at anyone else. When you're not there, I count the minutes until I see you again. My wolf recognized you the moment you shifted in that courtyard, not as a threat, but as something it had been waiting for, something it wanted to claim. Tears pricked at her eyes. Darius, I'm not asking for anything. I know you've spent your whole life running, and I know trusting someone goes against every instinct you have. But I need you to know that whatever this is between us, it's real to me. You're real to me. She kissed him again because she didn't have words, because her heart was too full and her wolf was singing, and she had never felt anything like this, not once in her entire life. When she pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. I feel it too, she whispered. All of it. I've been so scared to admit it, but it's true. You make me want to stop running. You make me want to stay. He cupped her face in his hands like she was something precious. Then stay. Stay with me. I will. She meant it with every fiber of her being. I will. They held each other beneath the full moon, two wolves who had finally found their match. And somewhere in the darkness of the forest below, a pair of watching eyes glinted and then vanished into shadow. The message arrived 3 days later. Rowan was in the training yard with the castle guards, demonstrating a disarming technique her grandmother had taught her, when a rider galloped through the gates. The horse was lathered with sweat, its flanks heaving, and the man on its back wore the colors of the northern watchtower. "Message for the king," he gasped, sliding from the saddle. "Urgent!" Darius emerged from the castle within minutes, his face grim as he read the scroll. Rowan watched his expression darken, watched his jaw tighten and his hands clench around the paper. When his amber eyes lifted to meet hers, she felt the dread in her stomach solidify into ice. "Clear the yard," he ordered. The guards scattered without question. When they were alone, he crossed to her and pressed the scroll into her hands. The words blurred before her eyes. A hunting party, 30 strong, bearing the silver chains and wolfsbane blades that marked them as silverborn hunters. They had crossed the border 2 days ago and were making straight for Thornhaven. "They know I'm here," she whispered. "They know." Darius's voice was flat, controlled in a way that meant he was barely holding on to his composure. They sent a declaration ahead. "A formal demand that I surrender the abomination hiding in my walls or face the consequences." Abomination. The word hit her like a fist. She had heard it before, whispered by the men who killed her grandmother, screamed by the mobs that had driven her from village after village. "I have to leave." The words came out steady, though her heart was shattering. "If I go now, if I lead them away from Thornhaven." "No." Darius gripped her shoulders, his eyes blazing. "I am not sending you out there to be slaughtered. We'll fight. I have an army. I have walls. I have 30 hunters with wolfsbane, Darius." Her voice cracked. "That's enough to bring down a pack of 50. They've been killing my kind for generations. They know how to fight us, how to trap us, how to break us. If you go to war for me, your people will die. Then they'll die fighting for something that matters. I'm not worth your kingdom." He cupped her face in his hands, and his amber eyes burned into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "You're worth more. Don't you understand that yet? You're worth everything." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted at the castle doors. Raised voices, the clatter of armor, and then a woman's sharp cry cut through the air. "Let me through! I have information for the king!" Rowan turned to see Bretta, the head housekeeper, struggling against two guards who blocked her path. The older woman's face was pale and stricken, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Let her speak," Darius commanded. Bretta stumbled forward, falling to her knees before them. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I didn't know what they would do. I didn't understand." Cold realization crept through Rowan's veins. "What did you do, Brita?" The housekeeper looked up at her, and the guilt in her eyes was answer enough. "There was a man, months ago. He came asking questions about the servants, about anyone new or unusual. He offered gold, so much gold, and I thought, what harm could it do? I told him about the quiet girl in the kitchens, the one who never shifted, who kept to herself, who seemed to be hiding something." The world tilted beneath Rowan's feet. Bretta, the woman who had dismissed her as simple and slow for 6 years, the woman who had unknowingly sheltered her and then unknowingly betrayed her. "I didn't know what you were," Bretta sobbed. "I didn't know he was a hunter. Please, I never meant—" "Get her out of here." Darius's voice was ice. "Lock her in the tower until I decide what to do with her." The guards dragged Bretta away, her wails echoing through the courtyard. Rowan stood frozen, her mind racing. The hunters had known where she was for months. They had been planning, gathering forces, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The raid that had exposed her, Had that been their doing too? A test to flush her out? This is my fault, she said numbly. All of this. If I had never come here. Stop! Darius pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could hear his heart pounding, steady and strong despite the chaos around them. You didn't choose to be hunted. You didn't choose any of this. The only ones at fault are the ones who want you dead. She pressed her face into his shoulder, breathing in his scent, cedar and iron and home. What do we do? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with determination. We fight. Together. He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes held no doubt, no hesitation. I'm not letting them take you. I'm not letting them drive you away. Whatever comes through those gates, we face it side by side. Rowan wanted to argue, wanted to protect him from the storm that was coming, the violence that had followed her all her life. But the stubborn set of his jaw told her he wouldn't be swayed. And some part of her, the part that was tired of running, tired of being alone, didn't want to sway him. Together, she agreed quietly. He kissed her forehead, fierce and tender. And beyond the castle walls, the hunters drew closer. Rowan waited until midnight. She lay in Darius's arms, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, memorizing the feel of his warmth against her skin. They had fallen asleep together in his chambers, too exhausted and too unwilling to be apart to observe propriety. His hand rested over her heart, even in sleep, as if he could keep her safe by sheer force of will. She loved him. The realization had settled into her bones over the past weeks, becoming as much a part of her as her wolf. She loved his stubbornness and his scars, his fierce protectiveness and his unexpected gentleness. She loved the way he looked at her like she was something precious rather than something dangerous. And because she loved him, she had to leave. Moving carefully, she slipped out from beneath his arm. He stirred, murmuring her name, but didn't wake. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, the same fierce, tender gesture he had given her in the courtyard, and forced herself to turn away. She left a note on his pillow. 3 words, the same ones he had written to her once. Wait for me. The castle was silent as she crept through the corridors. The guards at the eastern gate had been drugged. A sleeping draught slipped into their evening ale by her own hand. She hated herself for it, hated the deception, but she couldn't risk being stopped. The forest swallowed her whole. She ran in human form at first, saving her wolf's strength for what was to come. The hunters' camp was easy to find. Their fires burned like beacons in the darkness, and the stench of wolfsbane carried on the wind. By the time she reached the edge of their encampment, dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. A man emerged from the largest tent as she approached. He was older than she expected, with iron-gray hair and a face weathered by decades of hunting. Silver chains hung from his belt, and his eyes held the cold, flat look of someone who had stopped seeing wolves as people long ago. "The Silverborn," he said, almost admiringly, "walking into our camp alone. Either you're very brave or very stupid." "Neither." Rowan kept her voice steady. "I'm making a deal." The hunter's eyebrows rose. "A deal?" "You want me. I'm here. Take me and leave Thornhaven alone. The king knows nothing about what I really am. He was sheltering a servant, nothing more. There's no reason to bring war to his gates." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. But if it kept Darius safe, if it kept his people alive, she would tell 1,000 lies. The hunter studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and the expression made her skin crawl. "You love him," he said. "The Alpha King. That's why you're here." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. How touching! The last Silverborn, sacrificing herself for love. Your grandmother would be proud. Rage flared in her chest at the mention of her grandmother, but she forced it down. "Do we have a deal or not?" "We have a deal." The hunter gestured, and two of his men stepped forward with silver chains. Welcome to captivity, little wolf. I hope your king appreciates your sacrifice. The chains burned where they touched her skin. Rowan bit back a scream as they wrapped around her wrists, her ankles, her throat. The silver sapped her strength, pushed her wolf down into a dark corner where it howled in agony. By the time they finished, she could barely stand. They threw her into a cage on a wagon and began breaking camp. Miles away, Darius woke to an empty bed and a note that made his heart stop. He found the drugged guards, found her trail leading into the forest, found the remains of the hunter's camp, cold ashes and wagon tracks heading north. She had left him. After everything they had shared, after every promise, she had walked away in the night to face the hunters alone. His wolf howled with grief and fury, and the sound that tore from his human throat wasn't much different. He fell to his knees in the abandoned camp, clutching her note in his fist, and for the first time since his father's death, the Alpha King wept. She had tried to save him. He understood that her sacrifice came from love, not betrayal. But understanding didn't stop the agony, didn't stop the gaping wound in his chest where she had been. He stayed there until his captain found him, until his men pulled him to his feet and reminded him that he was still a king, still a leader, still responsible for more than his own shattered heart. "She's gone," he said, his voice hollow. "Then we get her back." His captain's eyes were hard with determination. "We ride north, we find the hunters, and we bring her home." Darius looked at the wagon tracks disappearing into the distance. His wolf stirred beneath his grief, rising with a new emotion, one colder and more dangerous than sorrow: rage. "Ready the men," he ordered. "We ride within the hour." No force on earth would keep him from her. No hunter, no army, no distance. He had finally found something worth fighting for, and he would burn the world to get her back. 3 days in the cage nearly broke her. The silver chains leached the strength from Rowan's body hour by hour, leaving her weak and trembling. Her wolf had retreated so deep inside her that she could barely feel it. Just a faint flicker of warmth in the darkness, like a candle flame guttering in a storm. The hunters fed her scraps and water, just enough to keep her alive. They needed her breathing when they reached their destination. She didn't ask where they were taking her. She didn't want to know. The leader, she had learned his name was Harkin, visited her cage each evening. He seemed to take pleasure in describing what awaited her. The Silverborn, he explained, were too dangerous to simply kill. Their blood had to be harvested, their bones ground into powder, their pelts displayed as trophies. There were collectors who would pay fortunes for pieces of the last Silverborn. She would be worth more dead than any living wolf in history. Rowan listened without responding. She had stopped speaking on the second day, conserving what little energy she had left. The silver was killing her slowly, but she refused to give Harkin the satisfaction of seeing her fear. On the third night, she felt something change. It started as a whisper at the edge of her awareness, a pulse of warmth that made her wolf lift its head. The sensation grew stronger, closer, until it blazed through the darkness like a beacon. Darius. He was coming. She didn't know how she knew, but she felt it in her bones, in the part of her soul that had become tangled with his. Their connection had deepened over the weeks they spent together, becoming something stronger than friendship, stronger than desire, something that distance and silver chains couldn't sever. The attack came at dawn. One moment, the camp was stirring with morning routines. The next, wolves poured out of the forest like shadows made flesh, black and gray and brown, their eyes gleaming with fury, their jaws open in silent snarls. At their head ran a massive black wolf with amber eyes, Darius, magnificent and terrible in his rage. The hunters scrambled for their weapons, but they were outnumbered and caught off guard. Darius had brought his entire personal guard, 50 of his best fighters, and they tore through the camp with brutal efficiency. Tents collapsed, wagons overturned, men screamed as claws found flesh. Harkin reached Rowan's cage before anyone else. "If I can't have you," he snarled, pulling a wolf's bane-coated blade from his belt, "no one will." The cage door flew open. Rowan tried to scramble back, but the chains held her in place. Harkin's blade arced toward her throat and stopped. A massive black wolf stood between them, teeth bared, blood dripping from his muzzle. Darius had shifted back to human form faster than she could track, and now he held Harkin's wrist in an iron grip, the blade trembling inches from Rowan's skin. "Touch her!" Darius said, his voice barely human, "and I'll tear out your spine." Harkin's eyes widened with genuine fear. "She's a monster, an abomination. You're protecting something that should have been exterminated generations ago." Darius broke his wrist with a single twist. Harkin screamed, dropping the blade. Darius released him, letting him crumple to the ground, then turned to Rowan. His amber eyes swept over her, the chains, the burns, the hollow exhaustion in her face, and something fractured in his expression. "I'm here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm here. I've got you." He ripped the chains away like they were made of paper. The silver scored his palms, leaving angry red welts, but he didn't seem to notice. When the last chain fell away, Rowan collapsed against him, too weak to stand. "You came," she whispered. "I told you not to. I left to protect you." "Protect me?" He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were fierce with something between anger and adoration. "You sacrificed yourself for me. You let them take you, let them hurt you, to keep me safe. I couldn't let them destroy your kingdom because of me. My kingdom means nothing without you in it." He pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt tears on his cheeks, or maybe they were hers. "Don't you understand that yet? You're not a burden I have to protect. You're everything. You're my mate, Rowan. My equal. My heart." The word mate resonated through her, settling into her soul like a key turning in a lock. Her wolf surged forward, finally able to rise after days of suppression, and it howled with recognition. Mate. He was her mate. Around them, the battle was ending. The hunters who hadn't fled were being bound by Darius's soldiers. Harkin lay whimpering on the ground, cradling his broken wrist. But none of it mattered to Rowan. All that mattered was the man holding her, the bond burning bright between them. "Take me home," she said. Darius lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Always. The journey back to Thornhaven took 4 days. Rowan spent most of it sleeping, her body slowly recovering from the silver poisoning as her wolf fought its way back to strength. Darius rarely left her side. He held her while she slept, fed her broth and bread when she woke, and growled at anyone who tried to make him attend to kingly duties. "The kingdom can wait," he told his captain flatly. "She can't." By the time the castle walls came into view, Rowan was strong enough to ride on her own, though Darius insisted she sit in front of him on his horse so he could keep his arms around her. She didn't argue. After days of cold and chains and loneliness, his warmth was the only thing that felt real. The courtyard was packed when they arrived. Servants, guards, nobles. It seemed like the entire castle had gathered to watch their return. Rowan tensed, expecting judgment, expecting whispers about the Silverborn who had brought hunters to their gates. Instead, they cheered. The sound washed over her like a wave, so unexpected that tears sprang to her eyes. People who had watched her scrub floors and wash linens were now shouting her name, reaching out to touch her hand as Darius helped her dismount. She saw Mira, the young maid who had always been kind to her, weeping with joy. She saw soldiers she had trained with raising their fists in salute. "They know what you did," Darius murmured in her ear. "They know you surrendered yourself to save them. Word spread while we were gone." "I didn't do it for them," she whispered back. I know, but they're grateful anyway. He led her through the crowd to the castle steps, then turned to face his people. The cheering faded into expectant silence. Rowan's heart hammered as she realized he was about to make some kind of announcement. 3 days ago, Darius said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, this woman walked into a hunter's camp alone. She let them chain her, cage her, and prepare to kill her, all to protect this castle and everyone in it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rowan wanted to shrink away, to retreat to the shadows where she had hidden for so long. But Darius's hand was warm and steady on hers, anchoring her in place. For 6 years, she lived among us in disguise. She scrubbed our floors and washed our linens and never asked for anything in return. And when danger came, she didn't run. She didn't hide. She fought to save a child she'd never met. And then she sacrificed herself for a kingdom that had never given her anything. He turned to face her, and Rowan's breath caught at the emotion blazing in his amber eyes. I've spent my whole life building walls, he said, quieter now, for her alone. Protecting myself, trusting no one. But you tore through every defense I had without even trying. You made me want to be more than just a survivor. You made me want to live. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, a band of black iron set with a single amber stone that matched his eyes. Then, before the entire kingdom, the Alpha King of Thornhaven dropped to one knee. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Rowan's vision blurred with tears. I love you, Darius said. Not because you're powerful, though you are. Not because you're brave, though you're the bravest person I've ever known. I love you because you're kind and fierce, and you see me, the real me, and you stayed anyway. Darius dash dash. Marry me. His voice cracked on the words. Be my queen. Be my mate in truth, before the gods and the kingdom and anyone else who cares to witness. I don't want to rule without you beside me. I don't want to do anything without you beside me. Rowan sank to her knees in front of him, taking his face in her hands. The crowd had gone utterly silent, holding its collective breath. I spent 7 years running, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Hiding, convincing myself that I didn't deserve a home, or happiness, or love. And then I found you. She laughed through her tears. You're stubborn and overprotective, and you growl at your advisors when they annoy you. And I love you. I love you so much, it terrifies me. Is that a yes? It's a yes. She kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. It's 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and the crowd exploded into cheers so loud they seemed to shake the castle walls. But Rowan barely heard them. All she knew was Darius's arms around her, his lips on hers, his heart beating steady against her own. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his and smiled. So, she murmured, what happens now? He grinned, a real smile, the kind that transformed his scarred face into something breathtakingly beautiful. Now, we live. 2 years later, Rowan stood on the cliff overlooking the valley where she had first run with Darius under the full moon. So much had changed since then. The wedding had been held in the great courtyard of Thornhaven, witnessed by the entire kingdom and blessed by the moon goddess herself, or so the priests claimed when a shaft of silver moonlight broke through the clouds at the exact moment they exchanged vows. Rowan had worn a gown of white silk embroidered with silver thread, and Darius had looked at her like she was the only star in his sky. The hunters were gone. After Harkon's capture, Darius had made an example of him, not through execution, but through humiliation. The great hunter had been stripped of his weapons, his title, and his followers, then sent into exile with nothing but the clothes on his back and the story of how the Alpha King of Thornhaven had broken him for daring to touch the Silverborn Queen. Word spread quickly. No other hunting party had dared approach their borders since. Rowan's identity was no longer a secret, and she found she didn't mind. The people of Thornhaven had embraced her not despite her Silverborn blood, but because of it. She was proof that the old stories were wrong, that her kind were not monsters to be exterminated, but wolves to be respected. Young shifters came to her now, asking to learn the old ways. She taught them what her grandmother had taught her, and in doing so, she kept her grandmother's memory alive. A warm hand settled on her shoulder, and she leaned back against Darius's chest. He wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on top of her head. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured. "I can feel it through the bond." She smiled. The mate bond had only grown stronger since their wedding, weaving their souls together so tightly that she sometimes couldn't tell where her emotions ended and his began. It should have been frightening. Instead, it felt like home. "I'm thinking about how different everything is," she said. 2 years ago, I was sleeping in the servants' quarters, terrified that someone would discover what I was. Now I'm a queen. I have a kingdom. I have you. You have more than that." His hands slid down to rest on her stomach, and she felt his smile against her hair. "Tell me again. I want to hear you say it." She turned in his arms, looking up at his scarred, beloved face. "The healer confirmed it this morning. We're going to have a pup." Joy blazed through the bond, his and hers tangled together until she couldn't separate them. Darius lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with an abandon she had never heard from him before. When he set her down, his amber eyes were bright with tears. "A pup," he breathed. "Our pup. Rowan—" "I know." She pressed her hand to his cheek, feeling the roughness of his stubble, the warmth of his skin. "I know." He kissed her then, deep and slow, pouring all of his love and wonder and fierce protectiveness into the press of his lips. When they parted, the moon was rising over the mountains, full and silver and glorious. "Run with me?" he asked, the same words she had spoken to him on that first full moon together. She grinned. "Always." They shifted together, Silver Wolf and Black, Queen and King, and raced into the night. Behind them, Thornhaven glowed warm with firelight. Ahead of them, the forest stretched endless and wild. Rowan had spent her whole life pretending to be weak. Now she was the strongest she had ever been, not because of her bloodline or her wolf, but because she had finally stopped running. She had found her home, her mate, her pack, and she would never hide again.